Thank you very much to the speakers. I'm sure I have both an easy and a difficult job because easy, these were fascinating talks. You must have many, many questions. Difficult because I can only squeeze so many questions into half an hour. So bear with me if we don't get to your question. I'm sure the speakers will enjoy chatting to you over lunch and through the course of the afternoon. I'd also like to just point out Ryan's sitting in the corner. He's online. And if we have any questions from the online community, they'll be coming through from Ryan. I thought I'd just make one interesting, from my perspective, comment as somebody who looks at digital technologies and reflects on the impact of those technologies on our lives. I think AI, more so than most, actually gets us to ask fundamental questions about who we are as human beings. And I think the subject of creativity is really at the base of what this is. For years, we have been saying that the difference between us and the machines is our ability to create, our ability to be creative, and now we are being challenged by that very thought, that very concept, and the three talks, I think, really got us to engage with what it is to be creative, how to encourage creativity, and ultimately, if creativity is based on, or at least a large part of, who teaches us to be creative and who we collaborate with to be creative. What does the world look like when AI is fundamental to that future, what we're thinking? So, having said that, I have to overcome the initial inertia for that 1,000 questions to stream in. Who's going first? Oh, right at the back, straight up. We have a roving mic, so if we get Zubair to...
Thank you, Zubair. Yeah, thank you. Those are all really thought-provoking and fascinating. So my question is that, if you cast your mind back to when we first had like search engines like Google, there was this hope that, it's going to somehow democratize and make accessible all this knowledge and information. But then what kind of crept in under the radar was these like advertising-based business models that we've seen have had this really toxic effect. And I wonder if people have thought about like what would happen if ChatGPT suddenly started taking on board this type of business model, and have people been discussing these concerns?
Great. Speakers, who would like to go first? Anna. Thanks, Anna.
Hi, yeah, this is a very good question and something which is definitely in there. So what we are seeing right now a lot is that legislation is lagging behind. There's technology development, which is moving very fast, and also depending on the region in which the technology is being developed, will have an impact on what sort of advertising or similar is possible to include. In this sense, I'm very optimistic that a lot of the leading companies at the moment are in the US, in the sense that, of course, they have a history of combining social media and advertising, but also that the US government is quite strong when it comes to legislation when the situation calls for it. I would definitely want to see a lot more activity on this. So there's a lot of sort of governance of AI, but also really getting the public and the academia more involved in tackling this sort of questions and really making sure that we have good roads to where we want this technology to end up in.
Thank you. Rebecca.
I wouldn't mind. So I'm really impressed with your optimistic view of what's going to happen. I believe, when Google started, I think there is somebody who recently published about this, please excuse the technical term, bullshitification of internet, where when we started with Google, there was this algorithm that you got the most used pages, again, high probability, Black Swan event, please remember that one. So you get the highest probability. Now your first 5 or 10 links are sponsored links. So if you want to know something, please do not use the first 5 or 10 links. Just go to the next page, because they are just paid for. So I think your concern is very valid. And I'm slightly less impressed with the US regulations. I'm slightly more impressed with what the EU does, but they're very slow. So we'll see what happens. I think we need to be vigilant, and I do agree with you that more developers and more academics need to ask the difficult questions and to bring ethics to the fore and make sure that instead of giving this disclaimer saying, I shouldn't be telling you this, but if you want to know, this is the, and then, you know, we need something. It would be nice if we could develop an AI conscience.
I would like to contextualize the question, if I may, into more of educational space, first of all. And so it's really, you know, can be have a long conversation about, you know, what future holds, but it's really, first of all, whether or not we're going to embrace these technologies in the educational space, especially in the classroom, in schools, going back to, you know, certain regulations in the US and in other countries, right? So I think what we might see more and more in the near future is that more of a curated version of those, more of a more like contextualized models that more specific to use cases. You can see that already with, for instance, Khan Academy working on certain, you know, list of prompts that they curated that are helpful for learners versus others that just revealing the answer essentially. Right? So you will see more and more of that happening. So it's, yeah, definitely everything is, you know, available outside of the classroom, but within the classroom, within the school kind of a context, I think this is going to be the trend. It all suggests so much in terms of what things will become commodity and what things will be more of a differentiation that will happen, right? So content generation, content creation, yes, high quality content will always have, you know, significant value, but it means that there will be less of a value to like the content itself, right, and much more value to the experience. So the experience, the, you know, curated, really highly impactful design of curriculum and you know, the learning experience that really truly lead to learning outcomes. This is going to, I think, this workstream is going to accelerate, going to carry much more weight than content that will become more and more of a commodity that can be easily generated per specific constraints, per specific prompts. But again, this is not to necessarily, you know, disagree with more pessimistic views in that sense. It's more about, you know, what will be almost the pathway to kind of embrace those technologies in a pedagogically, you know, meaningful way, as opposed to, you know, disruption that can be, you know, problematic.
In the absence of an artificial conscience, we have to work on the human conscience in this,
Sure.
I think.
Great, thank you so
May
much.
I
Oh yes,
comment
please,
on
Anna. Yes.
So yeah, great
Yeah,
comments.
discussion.
Great comments by you both, and I definitely agree. I think something that we are seeing, we are kind of seeing these two opposing forces. So we are sort of seeing this sort of generalized tools sort of taking over the sort of global cognitive space in a sense. At the same time as we are really seeing the dawn of customization, and we can certainly look forward to a future where we will have sort of AI assistants very well fitted to our needs and purposes. But often, as a case historically, and probably going forward as well, we will probably see quite a big difference between the free services that we choose to use and the services that we choose to pay for.
Thank you so much. Ryan, do we have a question online, please?
We do. We have quite a few, but I'll pick one of the first ones that have come through from Matt Glanville. I think it's to Yigal, but you can choose. Am I correct that your definition of creativity is based on ideas different to others rather than ideas which are new to the student? Evidence that this is very cultural dependent. For example, some cultures encourage ideas more than others, so it's harder to have an idea outside of their experience. And so if an idea is unique in their culture but common in another, how is this measured?
It's a great question. So definitely, like in any global assessment, definitely, you know, it's true for PISA. There's a lot to do with essentially validation, and building those tasks that will mitigate that risk. This risk is always there, and it can be also applicable to mathematics and reading and science as well. It is true that this creative expression, especially when it comes not only to the problem-solving domains or context we tested, but also to expressive domains, is it's more likely that those cultural differences, will drive some of that. But this was the process really to, build really double size or triple size, what we call item bank, or the challenges, the tasks that we build, and then basically testing those across different cultures to make sure that we really, basically account for those differences and on the tasks, the challenges that will show stronger performance, essentially, mitigate that risk, will make it to the main pool of those questions. Doesn't mean that it's just eliminating that risk, but it is part of the validation process, basically, we were going through. I can tell, it was also a long process to validate the type of orientation we will do with students and the type of also training that we need for the human raters to be able to really account for those. So we basically going through the validation studies, not just interviews, but actual validation studies with the tasks that we administer with students to really see to what extent we can reach high intellectual ability with already pre-scored or curated responses from students. So this was a process on both sides, student facing and human rater facing, to make sure that we basically prioritize, or we eliminate the tasks that show significant cultural, say, diverse bias in that sense, and only the tasks that will show strong promise and evidence and will basically mitigate the risk that this is going to be a significant driver. I can say that there are other things that can come into the play, and we see that in many of the assessments. Reading, for instance, reading comprehension is a significant predictor of performance in mathematics and science as well, right? So there are some other driving factors that can create differences and this is true. We tested, for instance, the ability of students to, the likelihood of students, for example, to criticize something, to reflect on their experience. So it can be different. So we shape basically the prompts, we shape the tasks to really mitigate that risk. But I can't say that it's just, absolutely not going to be there. It's just all this validation and the gates, if you will, that we're going through to make sure that we will, reduce that factor along with so many other factors that can play a role. So you basically want to make sure that you make inference on creative thinking as opposed to, say, reading comprehension or some of those other biases that can be part of that process as well.
Thank you, Yigal. Good. Right. Yes, please.
Hi. So today we have, first of all, thank you so much for all the informative presentations. Because today we have a lot of AI producing quotes, creative works, unquote, such as ChatGPT. It could generates novels, but we're not sure where the database comes from. And then there were also image generating AI, such as Midjourney, that deconstruct and reconstruct the artworks of artists both in the past and alive. So I just wonder, how would you comment on the exploitation of individual authors' copyrights and creative mind by putting their works into training?
So the controversial topic of copywriting, and I guess the materials, our children are leaning on.
Yeah, well, within IB, we struggle with copyright anyway, because when we assess, we very often ask students to include their inspirations, and we have very strict rules on how they acknowledge that. So they are trained to acknowledge the materials they get. They are human, creative intelligence, and not AI. So I don't really have position at this moment. I think we should ask Anna Katariina, because she's on the developer side, what they feel about that. But IB would think that the original creator should be acknowledged. I just don't know if a system can do that.
Thank you for the question. It's an excellent one, and one which is very salient in the AI community. The way work has progressed so far has been largely in that you need large amounts of data to train these models, so you use whatever is available. There's been a lot of, so for example, in image, in sort of machine vision, there has been problems with only identifying faces from certain ethnic groups, and these sort of things, sort of classic learnings from the field. Sometimes the solutions to this are not problem-free either, so when you notice that your data set is lacking in one sense or another, I know that there's been cases where when there was the need to detect black faces better, then simply for the purposes of the data set, the driver's licenses of citizens in Western Africa from a couple of countries were used without asking them if their image could be used. To take this a little bit in another direction, which I find extremely interesting, is just the value lock-in and the values that we are encoding into large language models, for example. So the knowledge, or if we will call it knowledge or intelligence at this point, or the creativity that we are encoding is very much based on the input data that we have put in. So I'm very interested in sort of from what, in what languages and from what cultures is most of the so-called high-quality data from. It might be the case that you have cultures where you write a lot of long text, which makes it very high-quality data, and you might have other cultures where you communicate in very short spurts instead, and this could have an impact on the representation as well in that data set, and definitely we can say that the global north is overrepresented in this, I believe.
We can take a more of a kind of student-centric approach to that question, just extend beyond that, because I think the legal teams will be able to cope with this question in a much better way than I am. But I would say that there is kind of extended part of that question related to artifacts generated by students, and to what extent students are underage, right? And then basically to what extent this artifacts can be part of the training data set for these models, including, for instance, the model I also presented about the ability to trace knowledge and kind of come up with estimation on what's next. So I think this is going to just be part of that process, really, to include that student-generated content within these models, and what constraints will have to kind of come with that. So there is a lot, I think, to do for legal teams to be able to kind of steer the waters. I think there is a lot related to like publishers, the conventional publishers in that sense, right? Because there is this major kind of almost threat that can be part of that process. But I'm like, from my side, I would be really I'm mostly interested in how we can basically create certain processes and rules around more for student-generated content, rather than, say, big publisher houses' content and their own copyright on that.
Great, thank you. I think, as with a lot of what Rebecca was saying in her talk, watch this space. I think we're still learning a lot about what's going to be relevant and how we're going to have to deal with many of these kinds of issues. Yes, please.
So do you want to democratize this?
I did the classic thing of only looking left. I did not look right. So,
it's only a quick question.
Yeah.
Just what you feel like the difference between a computer and a human is, and what potentially what that might be in the future. What defines us as a species? Compared to
yes, and I think that links with what I was saying about what it means to be human. Yeah.
I just wondered what you guys thought, and how that therefore relates to how we educate our species. In the event of AI and robotics and all of that, does that change how we define who we are?
Yeah. So,
what we want education
so
to be?
without a massive definitional disturbance to your humanity. Perhaps a thought.
Well, thank you for interpreting your question as a short question. It might be a short question, but it will require a long, very long answer. I have to say I don't know the answer now. I think we will have to do some very profound thinking about that. And I think the developers and the people measuring and we trying to teach the new generations will have to talk to each other a lot more than we're talking now. So I think one of the really important things that we need to look at is the developers are all positive and they have this great idea of how it's going to improve humanity, but do they know what it means for education? Do we have enough knowledge of pedagogy, of psychology, of assessment, of all these things? Are they sufficiently represented in this enthusiastic bunch of terrifically nerdy people, which I love, are making these wonderful things which are scaring the pants off everybody else? So that's my short answer.
Yeah, I will approach that great question from more of a skill development standpoint, right? There are so many different angles, dimensions to what can be a longer answer, philosophical answer and so on, but just from skill development. So if we are looking into, for instance, the Lego Foundation framework of the holistic skills or whole child approach, right? So it seems like what is happening now with generative AI and other new capabilities is that basically I'm hoping, and this is where it can go in different directions, hoping that it will this process will also almost like emphasize create even more power for us to be able to really carry more weight in terms of certain skills that were like underrepresented in our, in the classroom, in our assessments, in across the board, right? So, for instance, to what extent, memorization of facts and more of a, sort of the cognitive skills that typically will take over everything else. To what extent, we do want to see much more focus on social and emotional skills, communication, collaboration skills in the classroom, and also in our way of measuring progress with students from more of an assessment standpoint. The second angle to that is what I would refer to the multi-model kind of setting, right? So I think there will be potentially much more weight kind of assigned to this, transition between different modalities, physical space, digital space, and what's happening in between. So the value of those different, human-to-human interactions and those transitions, hybrid, physical and digital space, I think this revolution might, really almost like expedite that process. Yes, there is something something very strong where we underrepresented, less emphasized in what we do in the classroom or education or, in general as humans. And these are actually the most valuable skills and capabilities we should nurture, we should really cultivate. So I'm hoping that this is going to be the direction. Definitely there is, rationale for that. The question if, what direction will be shaped and how, we can do that in in the best way possible. This is something that for, the larger community to help us shaping. I do think that from the model standpoint, and we can touch that based on that a little bit before, is more of a generic transition from more like generic, AI, generative AI models into much more like specialized, much more, I think you refer to custom models that will be optimized for certain processes and outcomes, as opposed to kind of a universal, that's what we all do, that we just generate now movies based on those new capabilities, and our emails and our co-pilot, companion is doing that, in service of our interaction. But definitely there is going to be much more specialization, customization for these models to be optimized for certain outcomes that we don't see yet, deployed, implemented in the current models. So this is going to be, I think, very exciting also, I think, challenge for the developers to work actually with the larger community to be able to shape those models.
Great, thanks. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Pam Bernard, Professor of Arts, Creativities and Educations. And I'm asking a question that's particularly apt because we're sitting in a faculty of education. And it really relates to teacher education, which is in crisis, and doctoral researcher education, which is also in crisis, trying to respond with rapid change agendas in a very difficult context and time. And that's not going to change quickly. This morning you've been speaking beautifully, and thank you so much for all of your presentations, all really interesting, stimulating, and at times, provocative. I want to ask about the intra-action of human and non-human creativity. Simply put, how AI creativities interact and interact with human creativities, knowing that when this happens, the nature of knowing, the nature of being, and the nature of doing changes. And I'm talking to the doctoral students who will know I'm speaking about ontology and epistemology. So the nature of being and doing changes when we sit with AI and interact with it. So here's the question. What are 3, that's all, ways of navigating this rapidly changing landscape for either teacher education or doctoral education that we can really implement quickly? Thank you.
Great. So a short, long question.
I actually think I would say 2 things. Firstly, do not be afraid. Try to, because this is going to happen. It's not like bungee jumping. You can't choose. This is going to happen. So do not be afraid. Stay open to what could be possible. Stay positive, but stay vigilant. Be critical of whatever you... Maybe that's 3. Not fearful, open, and critical.
Well done.
And it's in the learner profile.
Great. Would you mind if I got to the online, Ryan?
Do you want to say something?
Where's Ryan disappears? He's disappeared. We can... Oh, there he is. Sorry. And then we'll come to yourself.
Question from Colin Price. Anyone have a view on creativity by analogy? I'm thinking of physicists like Maxwell. Can AI reason by analogy?
That's happening this afternoon.
So we have word from Judith to remind us that there's a session this afternoon that will cover that question in a fair amount of detail. But of course, it's not online. So does our panel want to take a stab at that?
Well, in research and in going back to my comment about understanding that there are different levels of understanding, the use of metaphor or analogies to explain something is a well-known strategy. So I'm not entirely sure if that is addressing the question, because I don't entirely know what's going to happen this afternoon. But I think using analogies to explain things in a way that other people can sort of grasp the deeper meaning is a very valuable skill. And to be honest, if somebody who says they know lots and lots of stuff and they cannot create an analogy to explain something to somebody who's not completely knowledgeable of that situation, I occasionally start to doubt how smart they actually are. So I think analogies and metaphors are really, really important way of explaining the world and knowing what the world is, interpreting the world. This is a personal perspective, which is very valuable in IB, but maybe not somewhere in the original, in the official regulations.
Fully agree with that. So one of the things which sort of keeps coming back again is sort of that it doesn't seem like storytelling is going anywhere. at the moment, at least. So we still sort of that's a form of human creativity, using analogy, using different ways of retelling the same thing. That seems to be one of the most difficult things to recreate, and also a capability which for humans themselves is very difficult, as all teachers, for example, know. So this is a fundamental human creative capability, certainly to continue to keep in your toolkit and develop. I wish we were all better storytellers.
There's Robert Dijkgraaf, who was the dean of Princeton for a while. He is really excellent. He always said, you need to be able to explain what you're doing, and he's a theoretical physicist. You need to be able to describe what you're doing, explain what you're doing, so that your 6-year-old niece will understand, or your granny. So.
Great, thank you. So I think we have time for one last question for the session. I know Judith's giving me looks, but I promised the gentleman we would have.
Thank you. A short question. As teachers look to evolve their teaching practice to incorporate AI, where should they go for trusted advice?
I think that's a great question to end on. I'm getting blank looks from the panel.
I think, so the thing is, we were talking last night over dinner, and we spoke very briefly this morning, and Anna Katariina already told me that things that were like that a week ago, or Friday, are now no longer like that. So I think that is another short question that will require some time to find an answer. I think, as I said in my presentation, IB is working with schools to try and figure this out, and will we then have a trusted resource where they can go? We hope so, but mistakes will be made. I mean, we'll do things wrong, and we'll try and correct them. And I'm not sure, maybe the developers will develop some tools asking ChatGPT 4 or 5 or 6, please make me a tool for teachers.
Certainly, I definitely see that coming as well, since education is such an important thing, and also so okay, a couple of things here. So first of all, the social intelligence system that we are already inhabiting is very robust in the nice way that as the goals keep on shifting, as new models keep on dropping, we will also see that the people inhabiting the social space will have still an opportunity to sort of sanity check anything they see that come to their table. So this is how we see teachers reacting to students using ChatGPT to create their essays. The teacher usually has a quite visceral reaction to, is this reasonable or not? And so as a sort of first line of defense in the social space, then the individual teachers themselves sort of from them, there's this emergent behavior of starting as a society to react to these things as well, as we sort of know from sort of regulations level and guidance from leading institutions. It's a little bit more of a sort of slow trickle down effect of good guidance on how to use these tools and incorporate them in education. So this is certainly valuable still to be vigilant, as you mentioned. And also, as we see, we should always think of who we are developing these AI systems for. So there's a lot of promise of AI assistants and tools to assist in teaching as well. We had a great chat on a coffee break about developing AI voice control for teachers to ask materials to be switched and this sort of thing on the flow, so that the teacher can be more present in the actual teaching situation. So I definitely think this is a sort of demands we should be also making for the tools that we accept in our social spaces.
Yeah, just to add to that, so I would say the key is, low risk, minimal risk experimentation, and really thinking about, the like trusted sources or certain like curated experiences that can really lead to learning outcomes, because I think this is what is going to make a difference. It's not necessarily, we bring ChatGPT to the classroom because we think it's cool. It's something, we just want to, shine with certain, new technologies, as opposed to this is how this is going to serve the learning, deeper understanding, learning process, and lead to better learning outcomes for my students. So this vision that teachers always, train towards that kind of a vision, I think this is going to be even more important to to embrace that. So experimentation, yes, there are different tiers of engagement with those capabilities. For instance, to what extent I'm using that as a teacher to prepare really the amazing lesson with my students, but this is not student facing. This is me as a teacher using those great technologies to enhance the lesson, the experience for my students. Definitely, it's much higher tier and risk essentially associated with that when you basically say, oh, sure, I'm just no curation, nothing. Let's do it in a classroom. In some cases, it will work. Maybe, in say middle school, high school, it's less going to be. It can carry certain risk, but certain challenges when you do that, with younger kids. So I think this process of really building meaningful learning experience that can lead to learning outcomes and seeing those capabilities enhancing that process, as opposed to kind of a more of a, sure, there is something very new, we want just to bring it to the classroom right away. So this, I think, what also policymakers, administrators in the schools are, have significant role in kind of driving these processes to make sure that it's really about optimizing for meaningful learning process and learning outcomes, as opposed to everything else, almost noise that is outside, that is just really driven by so many different motivations that have nothing to do with pedagogy, nothing to do with learning outcomes at all.
I just want to make the case, when people are, especially policymakers, are talking about curated resources, they always talk about best practices. I would like to make the case for what we call useful practices. So practices where you made mistakes and told us why they went wrong and how you maybe have improved on them. And at one time in a former life, I was advocating for a bank of worst cases. Didn't get much takers for it, but I do believe that we learn much more from what we did and where we had to adjust and change, because that will give other people also, because not everything fits where you land. I mean, something that works in the Netherlands might not work here, and something that might not work in Boston, or it might not work in Africa. So we need to be mindful of the fact that our best practices may not tell everybody what they need to know.
Great.
Useful practices, please.
Continued learning for us all. And that's where we will end this Q&A. Please join me in thanking the panelists.